All right, so we're diving back into the book of Genesis, but this time we're tackling the second half.
Picking up after that whole Tower of Babel thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So get ready for some serious insights about Abraham and his family.
A lineage that, well, let's just say they're kind of a big deal in the whole Bible story.
Huge.
Yeah.
So after scattering everyone at Babel, God picks Abraham's family to be like the vehicle for his plan of redemption.
It's wild, like hitting the reset button on humanity's story.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is at this point, Abraham is just a regular guy.
The video even calls him a no-name guy.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
not exactly who you'd picture being chosen for such a massive role.
Yeah, but that's kind of what makes it so interesting. God often chooses the unexpected.
So God promises him a nation, a great name, incredible blessings.
Total opposite of that whole human ambition thing we saw back at Babel.
It's like an echo of that original blessing from Genesis 1. Be fruitful and multiply.
Oh yeah, good point. Now it's channeled through this specific family line.
Exactly. Which is why the rest of the Old Testament is so focused on Abraham's descendants.
They become the people of Israel.
Yeah.
Chosen to be a kingdom of priests.
Showcasing God's character to the world.
But what does that actually mean? A kingdom of priests.
It's a big responsibility, right? Like they're a bridge between God and everyone else.
And it's interesting how this promise to Abraham gets woven into the hopes of those later prophets and poets.
The ones who envisioned a king from Israel bringing justice and peace to all nations.
Yeah, like the seeds of the Messiah are being planted right here in Genesis.
But let's zoom back in on Abraham's journey. The video doesn't exactly sugarcoat his flaws.
Oh no, he messed up a lot.
Denying his marriage, the struggles with infertility.
And then Sarah arranges for him to sleep with Hagar.
It's messy.
Totally. But that's what makes it so relatable. Abraham and Sarah aren't perfect.
Very human.
They make mistakes. They doubt. They even scheme.
But despite all that, God is incredibly patient and faithful.
It reminds me of that saying, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. And that scene where God asks Abraham to count the stars.
Promising him descendants as numerous as those stars.
It's powerful. Imagine struggling with infertility and then looking up at that vast sky.
Talk about a test of faith.
Yeah, believing God would actually fulfill that promise.
That's what faith is all about, trusting in God's power even when things seem impossible.
Then there's that covenant ceremony.
With circumcision as a sign of God's promise and the family's fruitfulness.
What do you think about that whole physical marking thing?
It seems like a tangible reminder of the spiritual bond,
A constant visible reminder of the covenant.
And from Abraham, we move on to his grandson, Jacob.
Oh boy, Jacob. Now this guy really lives up to his name, Deceiver.
Tricking his brother, multiple wives, family drama.
And then even getting tricked by his uncle Laban.
Talk about a taste of his own medicine.
It's a wild ride.
But even with all that chaos, God's hand is at work.
Oh, absolutely. Like that wrestling match between Jacob and God.
That scene is so powerful.
Jacob demanding a blessing, grappling with the divine.
Almost like a physical picture of our own struggles with faith. Right?
Definitely makes you think. And then that name change from Jacob to Israel.
Meaning wrestles with God.
Do you think that's more than just a name change?
It feels like God acknowledging Jacob's tenacity.
Yeah, and transforming it into something deeper.
It's a reminder that our encounters with God can really change us.
They refine us, give us a new identity.
And transformation is so central to Jacob's story.
He goes from deceiver
To someone who manipulates others for his own gain.
to someone with a new name, new understanding, new purpose.
It makes you think about how our own struggles shape us.
We might not literally wrestle with God,
But we all have those times of questioning.
wrestling with faith and who we are,
And sometimes it's in those moments that we discover ourselves,
our purpose, our connection to God.
Absolutely. And from transformation, we go right into Joseph.
Oh.
The video highlights that intense sibling rivalry,
Seriously, sibling rivalry gone wrong.
which leads to his kidnapping and being enslaved in Egypt.
It's heartbreaking.
But even in those really dark moments,
The video makes it clear that God is with Joseph.
like a behind-the-scenes director,
Yeah, orchestrating everything.
ultimately leading to Joseph's rise to power.
It makes you think, if God's there, even in the darkest times, how does that change how we see suffering?
That's a tough one.
It's a question people have been asking forever.
And the story of Joseph doesn't give us all the answers.
But it does offer some hope, right?
Definitely. He not only survives, but he thrives.
Despite all the hardship.
And then he uses his position to save everyone
Egypt and his family.
from that terrible famine.
Such a powerful testament to God's ability to bring good out of evil.
I love that line Joseph says to his brothers. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives.
That really gets to the heart of Genesis, doesn't it?
For sure.
God can weave even our worst mistakes into his plan for redemption.
It's a powerful message of hope.
Absolutely. And it's not just Joseph's story either.
No, we see this theme throughout Genesis.
Even the scattering at Babel
Yeah. Which seems like a punishment at first.
ultimately becomes part of God's plan of redemption through Abraham's family.
Makes you wonder, are there things in our lives that we see as negative?
But are actually part of some bigger plan.
Something more hopeful?
Definitely food for thought.
And-
And it brings us to the end of Genesis.
Which, as we said before, leaves us hanging a bit.
The family's in Egypt. The promises aren't fulfilled.
And those future hopes the video talks about are still up in the air.
It's like the story's just getting started.
It's such a good literary technique
Leaves you wanting more.
to see how it all plays out.
But before we jump ahead to Exodus...
We should take a minute to appreciate Genesis.
Oh, yes.
It's a masterfully weaves together these grand themes
creation, fall, redemption.
with the very human stories of all these people. Oh.
You've got ambition, betrayal, love, loss, forgiveness.
Everything that makes up the human experience.
And those characters are so well developed.
Abraham struggling with doubt,
Sarah, so strong-willed.
but also vulnerable.
Jacob, the cunning trickster.
Transformed by God,
And then Joseph.
the dreamer who goes through so much hardship.
And ultimately forgives his brothers.
Each one of them is flawed, relatable.
And a testament to God's grace.
It reminds us that God doesn't just work through perfect people
He uses real people
with all their imperfection.
to get things done.
It's a message that speaks to us all
Our flaws and failures don't disqualify us.
from being used by God.
There's another thing in Genesis I find fascinating.
What's that?
That recurring theme of evil and God's response to it.
Yeah.
From the very beginning,
Adam and Eve disobeying.
we see this pattern.
Human sin,
So-
divine intervention.
But it's not just a simple cycle of punishment and reward.
It's much deeper than that.
It's like the video says, humans keep making selfish choices.
Out of fear, greed, jealousy.
But God doesn't give up,
He's constantly finding ways to bring good out of those bad situations.
redeeming our worst mistakes.
The story of Joseph is the perfect example.
His brothers sell him into slavery.
Out of jealousy.
Such a terrible betrayal.
But Joseph ends up saving his family.
And countless others.
You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good.
It's like that one sentence sums up Genesis.
A powerful message of hope and redemption.
Makes you think about the times we've been hurt or betrayed.
Could those painful experiences actually be part of something bigger?
Some more hopeful plan.
Maybe we can be like Joseph.
And look back one day and see how God used those moments for good.
It's a powerful thought.
Especially in a world with so much darkness.
Before we wrap up this part of our Genesis journey,
Okay.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier.
About how Genesis lays the groundwork for the rest of the Bible.
It's the foundation of the whole story.
It introduces those key themes
Creation, fall, redemption,
and sets the stage for everything that happens next.
all the drama and conflict.
And ultimately the host that unfolds.
It's like we're getting a sneak peek into God's mind,
Understanding his heart for humanity.
his plan for redemption.
But the story's not over.
We're left with these unfulfilled promises
There's feeling of anticipation.
for what's to come.
And that's where Exodus comes in.
We see the Israelites
Jacob's descendants.
growing in Egypt
But they also face oppression.
and slavery.
And from that suffering,
God raises up a deliverer.
a leader named...
Okay.
You can't leave us hanging.
We'll have to find out in the next episode.
I guess I can wait.
But think about those lingering questions from Genesis.
Okay.
How do those themes resonate in your own life?
The stories of Abraham, Sarah, Jacob, Joseph.
How do they speak to your experiences of faith, failure, and hope
These stories are powerful,
with timeless messages?
and I think our listeners are just as eager as we are.
To see what happens next.
As we're wrapping up this deep dive into Genesis, I'm noticing something we haven't really talked about. The book itself, like how it's written.
And artistry of it.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the stories and what they mean.
But the way it's structured, the language, it's all very intentional.
One thing that stands out to me is those genealogies.
Ah, yes. The long lists of names.
I'll admit I've skimmed over those more times than I can count.
But they actually serve a really important purpose.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, for one thing, they create a sense of continuity.
Like connecting the generations.
It's a reminder that this story isn't just about individuals,
But about families.
lineages.
The passing on of a legacy.
When you read those long lists of names, what effect does it have on you?
It definitely reinforces that this is a multi-generational story.
And we see that especially with Abraham's family,
Each generation builds on the promises and the challenges of the ones that came before.
leading to this huge narrative of God's plan.
For redemption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the genealogies also act as a kind of framework,
Marking time.
highlighting important people.
Emphasizing how God's purpose is unfolding.
It's like they're signposts along the way,
Pointing us toward the goal.
like those "you are here" markers on a map.
I like that.
Right.
And then there's the repetition.
And those recurring themes.
I like be fruitful and multiply.
We see it with Adam and Eve,
With Abraham.
with Jacob's 12 sons.
Who become the 12 tribes of Israel.
It's this constant reminder of God's desire for abundance, the
Growth.
flourishing of humanity.
And it's not just that phrase.
There are themes of covenant.
Testing, blessing, deception, reconciliation.
It's like a tapestry woven throughout the book,
It's almost like a symphony.
with different melodies and themes,
Interweaving and building on each other.
creating this incredible masterpiece.
That's a great way to put it. It really speaks to the artistry of the authors.
They weren't just writing down events,
They were creating something that would shape people for generations.
their beliefs, values, worldview.
And they definitely succeeded. Genesis has had such a huge impact.
On literature, art, culture, theology.
For thousands of years.
It's amazing.
Why do you think these stories still resonate with us today?
After all this time,
Because they deal with the big questions.
the ones we've always asked.
Where do we come from? What's our purpose?
What does it mean to be human?
Is your relationship with God?
How do we deal with suffering and evil?
Every generation has to figure those things out.
And Genesis offers some profound answers.
It reminds us that we're made in God's image,
Capable of great things.
but also capable of terrible things.
And that God is working to redeem and restore his creation.
Even amidst all the brokenness.
And it all begins with a garden.
A man, a woman, and a choice.
Such a simple start.
That sets this huge story in motion.
The story of humanity.
And it doesn't end there. Genesis is just the beginning.
It's part of a much bigger story.
One that continues throughout the Bible.
And even into our lives today.
That's what I love about these deep dives.
It's not just about learning stuff,
It's about encountering God's story
engaging with it,
and seeing how it connects to our own lives.
our own journey.
So as we wrap up our look at Genesis,
We want to leave you with this thought.
how has this deep dive challenged you,
Inspired you.
changed how you think about God, humanity, the world around you?
What new things have you learned?
What questions are you still thinking about?
Keep exploring.
Keep asking.
Let the stories of Genesis guide you.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.